Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years, 6, 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to it. It is Wednesday morning, and of course, we are here at the Inside Studio, and we're about to get into some interesting conversation. It's a little bit chilly outside, but I have a feeling that inside here is gonna get hot because we are dealing with a conversation and a topic that has made its way up to the forefront in South Africa. It's been there and it's been lurking in the background, but for some reason now there is some momentum on this conversation, and it's starting to make its way all the way to the foreground. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists or our guests here in studio this morning for us to begin to get into this conversation. Over here to my right, we got obviously Mr. Larry. Don't you want to jump in and just welcome, introduce yourself to our viewers this morning?
Thank you, man. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name is Larry, Larry Vari. I am the founder of Color Day. It's an organization that also advocates for the rights of the indigenous people, the Khoisan people. I think that's enough.
100%. And then, of course, over next to Larry, we got Mr. Kevin Smith. Kev, don't you just want to say good morning to the audience and just introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Kevin Smith, attorney and partner at AG Incorporated. Also a chief of the Tukwe Royal House, activist for both indigenous and colored rights.
Perfect. And then, of course, over here to my left, we got Mr. Benjamin Lawrence. He's very proud about his surname. We just had a nice conversation before the show started. Benjamin, what's happening, sir?
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers. My name is Benjamin Lawrence II, and you're right, I am proud of my name and my surname. I am a ward councillor currently in Pretoria, in the city of Tshwane, Ward 43, which is basically the community of Eersterust. I've been a cultural activist for the past 20 years. I am also the owner of Our magazine, as well as I'm a member of the Coloured Foundation as well.
So there's an interesting conversation that's made its way to the foreground, and it's a conversation that it always becomes, there's a word we were using earlier before the show starts, and Mr. Benjamin was telling me that he'll explain to us why he has a challenge with this word, but the conversation has become controversial, right? And controversial for many aspects and for many reasons, simply because when we boil it down to what is a colored and who is a colored and what is the identity, as you can see the title of today's conversation is the colored identity. And what makes it difficult is because of the lineage and the history and the hurt and the pain and everything that goes along with this identity that we now call colored. And just when you begin to break it down in the different family dynamics and the different cultures and the different impacts from all these different cultures, and then now we end up sitting in a place where the apartheid government comes and says, okay, all the people that looks like this, you go there. All the people that looks like that, you go there. And so this big pot gets stirred, and eventually we get to a point where we get to a space in our lives where we don't know who we are, we don't know where we belong, we're not sure where we fit in. And I guess that's the conversation that we are having today. And I want to actually hand over to Larry. He's co-hosting with me this morning. Larry, don't you want to just take us in, deeper into this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Zakes. Look, I think the first point of departure when engaging in this particular conversation is understanding where that term or that classification comes from. And then as a foundation to unpack, the history of this, where it started, where it is, just this term or the classification of the colored person, and then move forward there. So I don't know, Benjamin, I wanted to ask you, in terms of opening the dialogue, your view, what you identify or would describe as colored. What do you describe colored as?
Okay. Well, it's very simple. The meaning of colored for me is a person of mixed race. That's the most basic and most simple, meaning of it, because that is where it comes from, and that is how we were identified and how we've identified ourselves as well. So being a colored is a person of mixed ancestry, especially from different racial, backgrounds.
Mm. And then if you say racial backgrounds, colored is a race that was created by the colonizer or the apartheid government. Before that, there was no races. Would you agree to the fact that there was no such thing as a race before the colonizer imposed those things? We were known by our ethnicity, by our culture, by our languages. That's how we were distinct as peoples.
Well, I cannot agree that there were no races. Races have always been there. I think where the challenge came in, is, as you've mentioned, is when somebody decided to say, you go there and you belong there. Because people have always had, social construct have always been there. Mm. If you look at, in this case, you're talking about ethnicities. There are different tribes. Mm. So, but when Europeans came in here, they found people here. Mm. There were tribes here. But
when you say mixed people, I'm just trying to understand, to move the conversation. When you say mixed people, are you not referring to mixed with white and not just mixed? Because if you take a Xhosa person mixed with a Zulu person, do you call that person a colored person?
No, this is why I specifically said, especially when it comes to mixed race. If you give me a chance, as I've mentioned, when Europeans came here, there was a disruption. Okay. Let's call it a disruption, because there was a certain order of things in on the African continent. Mm. Now, disruption sounds like a negative word, but it was a change that would never go back. When Europeans landed in Africa, what is human is, as much as we are different, people ended up mixing. And that's what happened. If you look back in the history when there was a group called the Orlam Afrikaners, the original Afrikaners, they were called Orlam Afrikaners. And the Orlam Afrikaners were a mixed group who were mixed with Europeans and the local, San and Khoi, or different tribes from the region where they were born. So my understanding, and this is actually in practicality, when there was a mix between European, because that's the origin, between European and then the Khoi and the San and whoever, that's where the first mixed race people came up, because that's what colored means. It means mixed race. And the fact that we are the most mixed group of people in the world, that's also something significant that actually further, it even further accentuates my point to say that this is who we are. We are a mixture of different identities, not ethnicities only, different race groups. That's why you had the Malaysians as well. You have, which are different. We've got Chinese people that have come here. So all of those different groups of people. Now, at the beginning, it was simple. It was a black and white, if I can put it that way. It was a black and white.
Continue,
it was a black and white. And then, now, if you look at, I always use the example of my own friends. I've got friends that have Chinese origin. I've got friends that have Indian origin. I've got friends that have, Khoi origin. I've got friends that have European. But at some point, you see that we all look the same, even though we come from all those different
when you say black and white, and I want to also rope you into the conversation. Mm-hmm.
Let's get into it.
When you say black and white...
Sorry, before you continue, just what you're about to say, there's a lot of people in the comment section. Please do drop your comments. We got the comment section open in front of us, and we'd like you to participate in the conversation as well.
Yeah, please do. When you say black and white, the very classification for someone to call you a black person is a colonial imposed... They classified you by the way you look. And the same way, the colored person, or that social construct, what they call colored, it was also because of the way you look, not because of who you are as a person. My understanding now of all of this is nothing to do with who you are, but everything to do with how you look. And it was a tool to divide people, I would say, in my understanding. Dividing people because of how they look, and not really where they come from.
Okay.
So when you say black, mm-hmm. You said now, according to your understanding, there was black and white for ease of reference. But where we are today in modern politics, we understand that brown people, there's now this group of people that identify themselves as brown because they do not want to associate as being black. And then there's the people who called everyone by a color, which is the white group, also identifies themselves as a color by the way they look. So the point I'm making is you made a reference to there was black and white when that's how it was in the beginning. But that's not true. The idea of color was imposed by the colonizer. We never identified with people by the color of your skin. You can't prove that to me that's how it was from the beginning. You understand what I'm saying? So when we unpack this thing of colored, I begin to see that the identity, or that people are calling it an identity, is not an identity. It is a tool that people have used to try and erase who you are by forming a new construct of peoples that now 10 years down the line, 10 generations down the line, people don't really know who they are, where they come from, because they are only meant to associate with people by the way they look and not where they come from. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So look, it's a complicated conversation, and that's why when we started the show, we said that it becomes complex and it becomes complicated, because now what you have is the apartheid government comes into play and says, okay, all the brown people, you're moving to Eldorado, Rega Park, Ennerdale, Eersterust, wherever, right? And now we're all here. Now it doesn't matter. You get colored people that looks white. I mean, I'm sure you have an uncle where there's blue eyes and light brown hair, and then in the same house you get a colored guy. We all sound the same, but that looks like a black guy. Like he has to relax his hair now because he's trying to fit in with the other gents, because his hair is not as glad as the other hair. But now we in an environment where we now have to kind of generate and create our own language. And we had to kind of generate and create our own culture. I might be jumping the gun here. But now, you said you had a magazine called Aware Magazine. Now we start making our own little slang words up that only we understand. And now we start making up these little references. And then even our dialect and the way we sound, our accent is different. Now I know when my parents had enough money to send me to a better school, it just so happened that the better schools were in the white areas. And it just so happened that now when you get there and you speak like this, they kind of don't know what you're saying. So now you have to kind of now end up doing this thing where you must now twang so you can try and fit in. And this is now just me speaking about growing up in, going to school in 92, 93, 94. That was the time, bruh, where you had to like try and, this is the time 94, 95 where that thing just broke. And now all of this opens where you can now move into different areas. And it's incredibly difficult because you're trying to make sense of who am I, where do I fit into this whole thing. But I don't know, I want Kev to jump in.
Let me just try and give us some assistance on how we can go about this conversation, When you speak about black, white and colored, we have to draw a distinction between biological factors and factors of a political consequence. Now, I think where this matter becomes complex is that we convolute the two issues. We convolute the political consequence with biological factors, right? Now, I agree with Mr. Vari when he says that it is something that was imposed, but it was imposed as a result of political consequence. Now, we need to understand also why political consequence is necessary in this type of conversation. People in power would use two arms or two instruments in order to maintain and to impose power. They use governmental instruments and they use legislation. Those things are used purely as a tool, and it's there to advance the society, right? It's there to advance the interests of those who are represented in power. Now, by them classifying black and white in the first place, it's to set humanity within whiteness. Right? It's to set personhood within whiteness. It's to say that for someone to be seen as human, the starting point is them being white, and their proximity thereto is how the law will then identify humanhood within them. So blackness becomes the opposite of being human. That is why when we have the distinction between black and colored, the political consequence thereof is again to achieve a political consequence. At the time, like Cecil John Rhodes said during their conquest, it was for them to get a form of cheap labor that was to be found in specific areas that they were conquering at that time. Now, when we take away that political definition of what black, white, and colored may be, that's where your argument might come in, where we say that the biological factors that tie into being colored are so vast that we can't pinpoint it to any specifics. And I think what our job is that we need to impart value on what we want that identity to impart. We have to say that when someone identifies as colored, these are the values that they must impose on the society, or that the society must expect from them. But because in the current dispensation, there's no value necessarily attached to being colored. There's no political value, nor is there much social value tied to it. That's where I think people have a bit of the problem grasping with why someone would identify specifically as colored outside of them being indigenous or Khoi or something along those lines. Because again, you can't impart any legal value from it, you can't impart any political value from it, nor any social value.
That's my question. Is there... Okay, go for it.
I don't agree with that.
For
I
it.
find that statement insulting and condescending, that you're saying that there's no value in this country with the identity of color. That means that we have not existed for the past 100 years, that we have not existed at all. So I hear what you're mentioning about the political, you're saying the political consequence. So there was political consequence for a lot of things. We know that. For instance, just to give an example, we know that this country has been a nationalist, has followed a nationalist agenda for 100 years. And the GNU represents the end of nationalism, if you think about it. First, it was Afrikaner nationalism, by the National Party, except for the time with the war, of course. But and then after 1994, it was African nationalism. That was the direction, that government has taken. And the people have shown that this nationalism, this nationalist agenda is not helping them. And this is why you see where we're sitting, and that's the result of the voting bloc. That's where we're sitting now. This is why we have a minority. Everybody's a minority now in terms of just political ideology. When you say that we have no value, I disagree, because coming back to, you were talking about biology. Now I'm going to use my community or myself as an example. No, not myself. Sorry. Let me just go back. I did make an argument earlier about the Orlam Afrikaners. Now the Orlam Afrikaners, who are the original Afrikaner, that's where the name Afrikaner comes from. And these people came from the mixture of the Europeans and the Khoi, on the Greek, not the Greek, but the groups from the Khoisan tribes, and they formed this social construct, and they formed an identity. And you're speaking about language. If you don't know the language of Afrikaans, that is where it was born. It was born from the biological consequence, as you've mentioned. There would not have been a language called Afrikaans if there had not been that biological consequence. That is why the first written word in Afrikaans was not written by the Dutch. That is why until Tosches decided to translate the Bible from what they called from Dutch into what they called the slaves' language. Then they became please, you must give me a chance. You must stop interrupting me now. You need to give me a chance to complete. So this is why. And Afrikaans is my number one example, is that the language was created by a disruption. A disruption of what? Of what was the norm. What was the norm in the Cape is that the Khois were living the way they were living. They were fighting with the sand. That was their lifestyle. There was no interruption from outside forces. And what happened? Boom, one day, these Europeans come in, and there was interactions. There were different types of interaction, but somewhere the interaction also resulted in a group of mixed people. And in that time, to communicate with these people, they developed this language that we call Afrikaans today.
To communicate with which people?
With the Europeans. But this is the intelligence that came from the locals. They said we can, and they created in the language today, as you can hear. That is why I always say to people that if you want people to talk about Savor Afrikaans, especially you Joburg guys, you like to use that word Savor Afrikaans, referring to how white people speak Savor Afrikaans. And I say, no, Savor Afrikaans is how the Cape Townians speak Afrikaans, because that is the savor, because purity is in its purest form, and that was its purest form. So now, you cannot take that away from where we come from. Every single tribe in the history of the world, even the tribes that we have in South Africa that did not exist at some point. There were no Zulus at some point. There were no Pedis at some point. But something had to be disrupted for them to be formed. A lot of the times there were negative things that happened. Sometimes it's war, sometimes it's slavery, sometimes it's the colonialism that you speak of. That was the result of, that was the disruption. And out of the disruption, what did we create? We created our own construct, our own social construct. And we created our own culture. We created our own traditions. That is what up to today. To give you a simple example, there's no place, there's no other community in this country that you can go to, except in our communities, where on a Sunday that we have before church, we have cook sisters and tea. Just to give you a very, very simple example.
I disagree on this fact that you're saying that we
yeah, but you see, I don't interrupt you when you speak.
That we created
yes, but I don't interrupt you when you speak. Yes, we did create it. The people we are how we react to what the circumstances are around. That's what creates people. The fact that you might be a stronger person, that is because how you grew up, how you became the person you are. The community I am in, Eersterust, for example, I always reference the different generations. The generations from the 20s laid the foundation. The generations born in the 20s. Now, they lived in Marabastad, they lived in Selborne, they lived in different areas before they were all forcefully moved to Eersterust. But at that time, they were identified as what they are identified today. But what I'm talking about, that there was a certain generation of parents, then there was a generation of teachers. And from that, if you look at the guys from, like I said, 30s and 40s, they built the communities. And that's where education became one of our strongest foundations. That is why at some point, because of the generation from the 60s, it was a big thing in our culture, that the 60s guys, majority of them were educators. And that is why in the 70s guys, they became your professionals. Now, at some point, just to give an example, there was not a single colored school in the old Transvaal that didn't have a teacher that came from Eersterust. Now,
I think let's allow him to respond now.
Yes, but you need to give me a chance to finish. I've given everybody, I've listened to both of them.
Yeah, but we also just want to make sure that we get a fair amount of time. Yeah.
It's fine. I will conclude. Why I'm using the example is that the situation that we were under during apartheid, our leaders understood the situation of the day. But what our leaders did is they used the circumstances to ensure that the empowerment within our community continues. You understand what I'm saying? And this is what built the foundation. Now, going back to those years ago when the law of the land was a specific way, our people were survivors. Because they come, and I believe it's a biological thing. Yes, it is biological. Because what you get from your parents, somebody cannot take. What you get from your mom and from your dad, you can't. There's a difference between you and your father. There's a similarity because it's your bloodline. But the difference is the influence that your mother had brought into your life. And that is why the combination of the two makes you who you are.
Let me jump in.
Look, here's the first. You said a lot, but I want to start by saying this. Firstly, we didn't create the term called colored. We didn't create a group called the colored group. It was imposed on us. We were told that you are a colored person. You never identified before they came and told you that you're a colored. You never identified as a colored. So for you to say that we created that social construct is a lie. It's not true. Because number one, we were grouped in particular areas. The colonizer put black people in a particular area, put colored people in a particular area. I'm using the words colored and black and all of that for ease of reference. They put us in particular areas. And as a consequence of what they imposed on us, we then found a way of living. We have a natural brown people, or people in general, are resilient in nature. So because of them being put into a particular demographic area, they have then interacted with one another, same people's group, but you're right when you say that they've been mixed. But Krotoa is largely known, if you go back into history now, largely known as the person who was the interpreter between the Dutch and our people, right? And out of that, the language, many people claim that the language comes from her interaction, where she later married with one of the Dutch people. But the language of Afrikaans comes from, many people claim it comes from that. So it doesn't, what you were saying earlier when you say that it is a the colored identity was a biological construct. It wasn't a biological construct. Because it was imposed. Remember, if you look at the history, they procreated with one another. Then they called those children bastards. Then from bastards, they became Griquas.
And bastards.
Bastards. You understand? Which is the same people's group. If you trace the history of these people, it goes back. I'm talking about colored people, what people call themselves as the people who call themselves colored. If you trace that same history, it goes back to a particular people, right? And this social construct that you call in the colored identity, which is not an identity, was a tool. You see, the apartheid government or the colonizer used it as a tool to erase people's identity, their history. They did the same thing with the Red Indians. They put them in a school. They told them, we're going to teach about civilization. So in the long run, you begin to see how our people want to associate with everything that is fairer of skin is better. The straighter the hair, the better. And anyone, dink aan jou nageslag. think of your children, think of this, because that civilization attitude, that civilization agenda that they had in terms of erasing our history of where these people come from and cutting them off from their true history, which is their inheritance, which is the land and everything that is in South Africa. Now, you also have to understand what these people's intentions were when they came here. White people have always had an agenda of money and resources. They're capitalists. So in order for them, and they think far ahead of everybody, so in order for them to achieve their goal in the long run, they know what they have to do. These people are the owners. They can allow so-called black people to do whatever they want because they're not the owners of the land. So their tool in terms of why I'm dealing with the colored identity, why specifically this particular group of people, right? Because there was, if you look into the Racial Classifications Act, there was nothing like a Khoisan. It was colored, black, and I mean, Khoisan wasn't there. So they kind of assimilated that same, even the people that weren't mixed, into that same category of colored.
Yes, that's what happened.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the long run, people forget who they are because 10 generations down the line, all they know is being colored, is a mixed people.
I want to give Kev an opportunity to get in there also.
Yeah, I just want to start, obviously, I think you said that how we impart or the assessment of value in the colored identity.
Kev, just get close to the mic.
Oh, no problem. The assessment of colored value within the society, you're offended by that. I just want to clear up that that's not obviously my position on it. I was explaining the reality of what it is. And the reason why I actually brought that up was to steer the conversation where you were going in terms of us having taken a consequence that we found ourselves in and making that a culture. Now, if we look at, when we think about how cultures have developed specifically in the African continent, right? If you trace the migration from Central Africa of the Bantu people coming down from Southern Africa, I'm not sure how extensively you guys have traveled Africa, but you can go throughout West, North, East Africa. Yeah. The languages or the Bantu languages sound pretty much the same as the ones we speak here. There are different dialects, but there are words and phraseology that is the same. It shows that with migration flows tradition, flows culture. Yeah. And then where those people settle, they then, it becomes a more subjective experience because, like you said, environment, who they encounter. That's where, of course, the Afrikaans subject also comes in. If we think about certain words in Afrikaans, like a pisang, for instance, and emmer, those are specifically Malaysian words. Yes. Now, exactly, so Afrikaans has been described as a contact language. Now, what a contact language means, it's a language that's developed once certain cultures get in contact with others, and they have to assimilate in order to communicate, like you've rightfully pointed out, right? Now, the thing that we have to also be very mindful of, and this is where I think is more accurately describing my position. We have to engage the political and the legal system as we find it, right? Now, there's a problem that I have sometimes when people say we want to identify specifically as being only indigenous. I myself identify as Khoisan, yet also identify as colored. And the reason I say that both of those apply is if we were only to identify as indigenous, it's less than 1% of the population. Now, we are in a representative democracy, so numbers do count. So if we are going to isolate ourselves within such a small stratosphere of the society, then our hopes at having some form of political leverage is then also decreased. However, if we then incorporate the colored population at large, it's about 8%, right? Almost 5 million people. We think about how many people voted in the last election, about 10 to 12 million. So that's almost, if all colored people voted within one specific voting block, that's almost half of the voting population. You understand? Yes. Not just that, but it would also have taken votes away from some of the current parties. Now, the reason why that, to me, is more important than just having an identity is, like I mentioned earlier, you use the political and legal system to advance the interests of your people, right? Now, we are in a position where we can say on both sides, both indigenously and as colored people, we can say that we are either, as a result of dispossession, colonial and apartheid dispossession, that's a fact. And others may argue that we are in a state of current dispossession as well through the current administration. So if we wish to undo or mitigate those consequences on our people, What is it that we have to do? We have to engage the system, meaning that we have to find political leverage. We have to consolidate ourselves as a voting bloc so that we can force an agenda that is for the interest specifically of our people and the advancement of our people. Once we then increase our baseline of the human experience that either an indigenous or colored person has within this country, then we can shift the discussion more along the lines of how does that identity then find itself in the society that we have then created at that point in time. We unfortunately are not at that point of development yet where we can make that type of an argument. We first have to worry about how do we get ourselves out of the hood, so to speak. How do we get ourselves out of poverty? How do we increase the base level of the human experience of both Khoisan and colored people? That must be our agenda first and foremost before we can think about anything else. Because how the modern society views identity now, it's an identity of self-preference. It's how I wish things should be for me. And like I've said, we are not in a position where we can think on an individualistic basis. I cannot worry about how you have to view me when there are people who are still dying in the townships, when our townships are ravaged by drugs, violence, alcohol, and things of that nature. So we must first engage the system to alleviate those consequences from us. And last example I'll make, why I say that we mustn't always tie ourselves to sentiment only. During the apartheid struggle, and I'm sure your father has a lot of experience with this, the sentiment of apartheid was bad globally, but the sentiment itself didn't dissolve the structure. We still had to engage the structure as we found it. We still had to consolidate. We still had to go and vote. We still had to break it down within the confines of what it provides for us. The issue I have with our people is that we don't want to engage the system. We want to sentimentalize the system. Yes. We want to theorize our way out of the system, and that's not going to help us. So before we have a distinct grouping between colored or Khoisan, we as a group have to form a political bloc in order to assist the interest of both of those parties. Then from there on out, it will assist our individualized identities.
So Kev, there's an indigenous cultural aspect here at play. There's also a political aspect at play. And I think between those two lies the challenge that we're addressing in this conversation.
Exactly.
But here's my thing. Now, how do you then, and this is the struggle, I'm speaking about the personal struggle that I've been having with myself and having these conversations even with my father, my grandfather that has since passed on. I think I mentioned this in the last conversation we had, that my aunt found my great-grandfather's ID, right? And she showed it to me. And then I asked her then, who was he married to? Because I want to understand who my great-grandmother was. To the point where I was on my way to drive to go and find the graves. Because I asked my aunt's cousin, do you know where my great-grandparents' gravestones are? I want to go there and read what it says on there and understand if indeed it still exists, right? Now we're talking about probably 100 years back now. But my contention within myself is trying to find that bloodline that now attaches me to something of identity. Because when we speak about Khoi, when we speak about San, when we speak about these things, I think it's important that when an Afrikaner comes and says, I'm from a Dutch descendants, they got even to the point where they can go to the Netherlands, or they can go wherever, and they can go and find in the history books to say that I can trace this thing from where I am now, sitting here in Johannesburg, South Africa, all the way through to the Netherlands, and find my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was Yaku from wherever else, and then he married this one, and then it worked its way down to where I am now. And therein lies the power of identity, and therein lies the authority that you have to say, hey, hold on, this is who I am. But the apartheid government seek to erase that, like Larry rightfully pointed out, by burning the things out in Cape Town, burning where a lot of our things were placed. But since then, Professor, what was that professor that we had on the show? He since then went, I think, to the Netherlands, and he went to go find some of the documentation and some of the history stuff. And then the professor that writes the book Humans or Bastards, and he went to go and find some of that information. And I think, but I guess the question I'm asking is, how does the colored lighty that's walking around in Eldos tie his identity back to the Khoisan lady that was, like, I have a friend, Ashley Saltz, is in government now. He recently found out that the Khoisan lady that gave him his new name now is actually his biological. He's related to her biologically, which then gives you a strong point of departure, and it gives you that confidence to be able to say, "This is who I am. This is where I'm from, and this is where I stand for." Do you understand my dilemma that I'm fighting with inside? And before you jump in, that is, I can assure you, a lot of colored people's dilemma. Where do I fit into this thing? And I guess that's the whole point of the conversation.
So this is why I go back to the social construct. I go back to that. And what you're saying, I have now the opposite, where I actually know I can trace my lineage because, you understand, I'm fortunate it's not as distant as would be with most people, you understand. For me, it's a little bit easier.
And sometimes it becomes convoluted with loskinders and all that kind of stuff. It becomes difficult.
Like I said, I'm fortunate that for me it's easier. I'm not going to say clean, but it's a bit easier. So I know from if I look at my 4 grandparents, I can go a few generations back. I was fortunate that I was in a family that, I mean, for instance, my grandfather, who I'm named after, died in 1969. We never got to see each other. But my grandfather from my mother's side made me understand how proud I should be to be a descendant of that man because of the link that he had with my father. So, and vice versa with my father as well. So what you're saying is exactly what I'm getting at, is where the solution starts. And it goes back to what you're saying. I wanted to get to that point because that's what matters most of all. Not what the difference is between what we see in terms of colored or Khoisan, in terms of, you know, the labeling of ourselves, but because we are the same grouping. Whatever we call ourselves, if we take out what we call ourselves and we put it one side, you cannot separate us. But coming back to your question, now this is me as an Eersterust boy. I always used to make sure that everybody, from my friends here in Johannesburg, they had to understand that, hey, I'm from the best colored community in South Africa. That's my view. Why? And I would go back to our history as a community. I would go back to, for instance, about football. I would talk about the fact that Sundowns was born in my community. Before it went to Mamelodi, it was a team that was created by colored people, the original Sundowns. The fact that Super Sport, that is now Super Sport, was Pretoria City, etc., etc. I can go with regard, even with music. I've got a history of my community in terms of music and the impact it had on a national level. The fact that for me, I mean, the Club Bel Air, for instance, everybody knows the Club Bel Air. There's a lot of things in my community that I think, as an Eersterust resident, that when I have that information as a young person, when young people know that this is the level of excellence that we come from. Because even with identity, before you get to identity, you have to get to the worth, because I think a lot of the lamentations come from self-worth of our people. Because we've got a constant, we've got this victim mindset about die boere die aan ons gedoen en diese die aan ons gedoen, and we're constantly preaching that gospel that we are victims. And I do not preach the victim gospel because I don't believe that I'm a victim. Another example I want to make is Anton French. You all know who Anton French was. You also know the story and the circumstances under which he was killed. That he did something, he was our Leonidas, if you think about it. So now we have a choice to decide, is Anton French, was he a victim, or was that guy a hero? Was that guy a victim, or was he a hero? Now, if we look at him as a victim, then we're going to constantly be talking about what people have done to us. What has been done to us is not a lie. What has been done to people in South Africa is not a lie. It's a history. It is the fact. But the thing is, we are now overshadowing what somebody else did to us. You know, we're letting that overshadow what we did in those circumstances, what the pioneers and the forefathers, because there are great men. If you look back as far as, 1650, they are great men. I mean, the first political prisoner, what's his name? Aytaya. We cannot speak about Aytaya as a victim because he refused to be a victim, but they feared him. There was fear for that man. But I have never heard anybody talk about the heroics or how powerful Aytaya was. I don't hear people talk about how powerful, I'm going back to Anton French, was. So I speak the language of power to say that my people were powerful because they did this and this and this. The fact that today, as a musician, I'm proud. I didn't have a mentor, but just learning the history of musicians before me, people like Winston Campbell and the Miracles, it made me feel like, hey, if they've done it, I can actually do a little bit, a little bit better. And the same with the football, as I've mentioned earlier. But I'm just going to cut it there because
Let's hear
What I think, I fully agree with the fact that we need to celebrate the achievements that we have achieved over the years, right? My challenge is that we are putting this in the name of a colored identity, right? Oshomato, you can name a lot of different things that was achieved, that we achieved as a people's group over the years. But we are putting this in a colonial created classification that was used as a tool to erase our identity, our history. Now, I don't disagree that we need to have political power or things like that. It's our right. We need to pursue that. My challenge is that we are pursuing the same thing under the wrong banner, which is this colored classification. So why can we not pursue our political power in a different construct? In our original construct, in a construct that has always been us, not something that was imposed on us, it was given to us by someone with malicious intent. You understand what I'm saying? So why is it that we need to hold on to something that was imposed and later on scrapped? Because the racial classifications were scrapped in 1991, which also goes back to the fact that this ideology of race had it was designed to do certain things, right? Apartheid was later declared a crime against humanity. These constructs that you are clinging onto is part of that thing that was declared a crime against humanity. So my challenge is not what you are, the underlying things of what you are saying, the history, the achievements, the victories. All that is good. I also endorse that. But what I'm saying is the banner under which we are doing this is wrong. And why can it not be then that a colored person, so-called colored person, who has Bantu ancestry, be proud and say, I'm a proud Zulu, or I'm a proud Xhosa, because that's where I come from. But that's because in our minds we've already been, and I said this earlier, we were created to perceive the closer you are to white, the better. So in the long run, this is why I believe in what I've seen. Why we cling on to this identity? Because it is a semi-white identity, and we've always believed to praise the white man, the boss. That idea, and that is the reason why I think we need to break down this colonially imposed classification that was imposed on us. You understand? So why can we not, if you can't get, I'm talking about even from a legal perspective now. I know you've mentioned from a political perspective how we can leverage that power, but why can't we do it under a different banner? That same classification of colored, right, cannot get you the land, for example. So it limits your pursuit in certain things that you only have to function as this construct in the way that the colonizer has designed you to function as. So my point that I'm making is, and I'm trying to deal with the fact that you've highlighted two things, that there's our identity, but also have a political agenda that we need to achieve. But why can it not be achieved in your indigenous identity? Because down the line, if we pursue this 10 years, 20 years down the line, then how far are you from where you're supposed to be, your root, your originalness? And this, for me, goes back to the fact that we were taught to look down on being Khoisan, that you were a lesser person. I mean, I'm going to say this just as a point to substantiate everything I'm saying, how these people perceived us, and why I totally disagree that we need to continue with this identity, that these colonizers have issued permits to hunt our forefathers. I mean, a permit to hunt. So this, in essence, makes you realize how they perceive us, how they see us as lesser people. So this is why they couldn't even identify with us as white, even though we have white ancestry, some of us. So you have to be a certain something, but not a European, and derive your ancestry from, or claim that ancestry from Europe. So I'm saying that, like I said earlier, the political thing, good, but the way the banner under which we are doing, the vehicle which we are pursuing it in, should change. Because that is depriving you I'm talking specifically of Khoisan people now, and even of Bantu people, of being who you really are, where you truly come from.
I want to hear what Kev's thoughts are, because I wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I can actually answer both of your questions in the same way. I remember you said, how do we tie a small colored light? How does he tie himself back to the colored identity? And why
To
can't
the Khoi identity.
Khoi
the
identity,
same.
yeah. And how do we then shift from a colonial banner to one that is more natural for us as Africans, right? And it comes down to perceived value. Now, if you think people identify with things that they have perceived value in, right? The reason why for a large demographic of our people, they don't identify with Khoi because they don't find any inherent value in their identification. So our job is to bring that value back into our people. Because once we establish value from that perspective, our people will then have something to tie and then to say, I actually identify with this. So it comes not just with value, but with education. It comes with exposure of who our people are. For instance, I always make this example. We have an inherent history with fighting colonialism. The first fight against colonizers was by a Khoisan chief named Nomoa. He fought them in the Cape. We had been fighting colonizers since before the 1500s. 1500s.
Before 14, eh?
So we have an inherent history with the struggle. If you think about struggle heroes like Dulce September, she was assassinated in Paris. She was the most senior person of the ANC outside of South Africa's borders. And she was one of the only ones at the time that was assassinated outside of the country. That's a colored woman, right? So we have an inherent DNA that ties us to the liberation of this country. That's the one thing that we need to bring back into our people. Now, when we have to reset what our people identify themselves as, our job is to say, if we, or from your perspective, if we are going to say that we need to pursue the future for our people as Khoisan, we have to first establish what those values are and what it then brings within the tapestry of the country. When someone says, I see myself as Khoisan, inherently they must think, I see myself as one of the liberators from inception of this country. I see myself as one of the best athletic products, as you've mentioned. I mean, in sports, the list goes on, you know. When it comes to intellectual capacity, when it comes to the business world, those are the things that we then need to tie back into the Khoisan identity for us to change that.
Sense of pride.
And the pride needs to be backed by substantiation. And that substantiation is what we have rightfully so achieved within not just the confines of South Africa, but throughout the continent and globally, right? Now, what we then do thereafter is that we need to take our people and we need to stop thinking just within the confines of our small communities, our Eldos, our Eersterust, even thinking just about South Africa. We need to start seeing ourselves as a component of not just the continent, but a component geopolitically within the globe. And if you see, there are people who actually do that. We hate what AfriForum is doing, right? But if you think about why they're doing that, it's because in the confines of South Africa, they don't have enough of a numerical majority for them to impose certain of their interests onto the country. So what do? They find that leverage elsewhere. They find it outside. So they find someone that can impose that leverage on their behalf. We do not do that on behalf of our people. So when we see ourselves in this situation, we are the ones that are to blame because we are not using the frameworks that are open to us in order to advance our own interests. So hence what I was saying previously, before we just think about the names and the labels we give ourselves. What does each one of those mean? And of course, subjectively, colored may mean something to me, it may mean something different to you, it may mean something different to you. We need to think of it objectively.
Yes.
When we speak of I'm colored in South Africa, what do South Africans think I am? Do they think I'm a gangster first? Do they think I am a businessman first? What do they think about? Continentally, what do they think I am first? Globally, what do they think I am first? We first need to change the value or the perceived value that we have in each and every one of those identifiers before we can say this is the one that we choose going forward. That's what I'm saying. We take the history that our people have and we say that,
Yes.
and this is something that I personally also do. I run a page called Colored Legacy where I highlight all of the things that our people have done, from the Khoisan, the Nama, the Griqua, all of those things. If we think about the Griqua was the most wealthy, one of the most wealthy Khoi tribes at the time they were dispossessed, not just with land, but in terms of cattle,
The cattle
assets.
could stretch from the Cape Point
You
all
understand?
the way up through the Transvaal.
You understand? Now, when you think of a light in Eldos, and he's a hustler, for instance, that entrepreneurial spirit comes from somewhere. Can we not then tell him that is the blood that the Griqua and the Nama have given you? They were as entrepreneurial as you are now, but they were doing it in the confines of what they were as a kingdom at the time. Also, us talking about ourselves as tribes and things, that must also change. We were kingdoms, you know. That gives you a different engagement when you speak with people continentally, globally, things of that nature. As a chief myself, when we engage other kingdoms like in the UAE, they see us first and foremost as monarchies. They don't see us as tribes living in huts and things of that nature. That is what I'm saying, what we need to start doing on behalf of our people. When they can get perceived value in whatever we tell them that they will follow. And they will say, yes, I am Khoisan because I want to benefit from the value that is derived from that label.
Now, I want to ask you just a short question, just to answer it. Do you find all of these things that you've mentioned now in this term or this classification as a colored, all of these like a geopolitical footprint? There is no monarch history or there's no real value in it, and
No
it's
foot
not
to stand on under
it's
the
not to
coloured banner.
devalue the people. It's to devalue the term. I feel. You understand what I'm saying? So I agree 100% with what you're saying. It's just that how we perceive ourselves, how we identify ourselves as. Why can we not? And I'm saying this again, and you can respond.
I'll respond.
Why can we not have that same pride in who we really are, the owners of the? I mean, we put this thing up here as the series, the name of the series that we're doing. We are not coloreds. We are the owners of the land. And that goes back to the value that you're saying, that we need to educate people on, that you are not just a displaced person, a mixed person that is stitched together by rape or however other people have classified us. You are the owner of the land. And you begin to have, build this pride, a sense of value also. Like, I get iets om trots. I have something to be proud of. And it begins with decolonizing our people. Now, we only know about apartheid. We don't get taught about colonization as if the liberation movement started in apartheid.
Since before 1652.
So all I'm saying is, on the point that you're making, is that value. Why can it not go into who you really are, not what you were told you are? You understand what I'm saying?
Okay, so again, there's a lot of things that you spoke, Kevin, that I agree with, because we can have these conversations and these debates as far as possible. But one thing for sure is that I cannot, nobody can tell me who I am. I choose my identity. The same way that you choose your identity. And the mistake that the Khoisan movement is making is that movement ons of ons Murio, I'm sorry for the language, that movement ons of ons Murio approach to identity. And I'm telling you, it's going to fail. Because let me give you an example. If you are Christian and I am Muslim, my belief in Islam started at some point. Now, every religion believes that they are the correct religion. Every person. All the religions that you have in the world, even the different denominations in Christianity, each one believes that I am right, those ones are wrong. But there's one truth. So now, if Christianity is the ultimate religion, that's the only way for people in this world to go. If God, the God of Abraham, is the only way to go, and I am, I'm Islamic. Do you think that, especially now in our day, because remember there were years where people were forced into Christianity. Do you believe that the approach, the antagonistic approach towards me as a Muslim, would turn me into a Christian? No, it will not. But the respect of somebody's belief is where the starting point. Now I've attended a lot of these events that were run by the Khoisan movement, and one particular person who passed away now, Dr. Leonard Martin, he was one of the people in the forefront of this movement. And one of the criticisms I gave them when they came to Pretoria was that you have not consulted us. You cannot tell me that this that you believe is wrong. You have not consulted me. I'm deciding for you that this is who you should be. You have not consulted me. Now, we keep speaking about the apartheid government. that have forced people, number one, into traditions, that have forced people into culture. Because if you look at the township culture versus African culture, is contrasting. Township culture versus African culture, I'm talking about South Africans, I'm not talking about anywhere else, is contrasting. For instance, township culture threw away the most important thing about being African, time. Have you heard that joke that people say African time? African time means to be on time. That's African time. But township culture is about calling, the lack of respect for time. That's township culture. So it was enforced by somebody else. So now you're telling me that it is wrong that these people have forced us to live a certain way, to be limited in the way that we can move, to be limited in the way that we see. For instance, you mentioned that white was better, and the darker you went down, the worse you went through. Somebody forced you to be in that situation, to say that the white man is the boss. That's what happened in the past. Now, in the same breath, you are saying that, but you're also saying that you that call yourself colored, firstly, there's no value. I'm just paraphrasing. There's no value, there's no benefit, there's no history, there's no culture, there's nothing that you have unless you become what I say you should be. You're telling me that I, personally, I don't have Khoisan heritage. There's nothing wrong with Khoisan heritage. In fact, I am proud to see the history, and I am a firm supporter of the recognition and the goal that the Khoisan movement is chasing, that it needs to be fulfilled. I am a full supporter of that. But I do not have Khoisan heritage because I am second generation colored. I'm third generation from my father's side, South African. On my mother's side, it's Tswana. You understand what I'm saying? I do not have Khoisan heritage.
That to be a
No. Give me a chance to speak. Please, you keep interrupting me. So now you're saying to me, I come from black and white. I'm very straightforward. Like I said, I know my history, 4 or 5 generations. I come from black and white. I'm going to say black and white because this is how people in this country identify with it. It's not an insult. I'm not insulting anybody. When we speak, in general, on the street, when we speak to each other, that's how we speak. That's where I come from. That's where I come from. That's my history, my biological history, as we mentioned earlier. So now, for me to say that I am black would be that I am denying my bloodline from my father's side. For me to say that I am white would be that I'm denying my heritage from my mother's side. That's me. So what colored means to me is the elements of everybody that has come together, that has created who I am. And that's the identity of being colored. I am proud of what I received from my mother's side. I'm proud of each and every person that has contributed to my existence. And that's what colored means to me. That's what it means to me. That I am proud that I come from everywhere. And the way that I live, I can show you, even the way that I live in my house versus my uncles. My mom is the sister. But if you look at the way that her brothers live in their homes, and my cousins, and the way that we live in our home, and the way that we lived in my grandparents' home, you could see the difference. It was not forced upon us, but there was a difference because of the fact that how all these different elements, came together. And this is what it means to me. So I'm saying to you, no, I refuse to be identified as black, not because there's something wrong with black. I refuse to be identified as white, not because the white man was evil, no. But I am happy to bring them all together. And I do also refuse to hate white people because of what happened in apartheid. I refuse to also identify white people as the enemy. I will not identify they are human beings, and I also refuse not to recognize them as Africans because they are Africans. We are all Africans. How many years would it have to take for you to become African, or even myself? Because now I come from I've got European descent. So you're saying to me, now I have to cut myself into either a quarter to say that I am African. I am as African as they come. I am as African as they can be, and I am as colored as they can be, and I'm as South African as they can be because I am here. I did not come here by boat. My father didn't come here by boat. My grandfather didn't. Maybe his father came here by boat. But the license to say that you have a license to be called South African because of the color of your skin, that's exactly doing the same thing that you said, that the white government, that your license to be a human being is dependent on the shade of your of your skin.
You're a
And I
Lawrence.
refuse.
You're a Lawrence.
Yes, proudly so.
Exactly. So are you denying that you are your mother's surname when you say that you're a Lawrence? Because you're saying if you have to choose something, then you're denying the other. But when you're choosing your surname, which is how you identify yourself as, I'm a Lawrence, you're choosing your father's surname, or it was imposed on you by whatever cultural traditions, but you are something, you are someone. You're identifying as your father's lineage. So this idea that you want to come, you're not a, whatever your mother's surname is, you're not a in between the two. You're a Lawrence. You proudly say, I'm Benjamin Lawrence. So why, when it comes to dealing with a particular issue that has so much deep ramifications, you refuse to do it? And that's because I believe it's because people want to cling on to being semi-white. That's the truth.
No.
Can I just ask also?
I
Wait,
need
can
to
I just
respond.
ask a question?
No, I need to respond.
Let's just hear what Benjamin
Okay.
asked.
It's
Kevin asked.
no, it's going to actually
Yeah.
tie in with what he's
All right,
asking,
okay.
right? When you identify as colored, you have said that obviously it's your pride in the things that have come together to create you at
That's
this
right.
point in time right now.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, when you say that, do you see yourself to the exclusion of a Khoisan identity, or is it only specific to how your genetic makeup is? And do you think that that applies with anyone else that identifies as colored?
Well,
And then just
yeah.
a small one.
Yeah.
With what Mr. Larry is saying on the side here, I don't want you to be distracted in how he's asking it. It's
Yeah.
just that, of course, the next Lawrence that comes from your lineage, it's
Yeah.
going to be extending a
lineage.
European lineage. Yeah.
Yeah, and let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with that. We've created the concept that something that comes from Europe is evil. I'm sorry, it's not evil. I'm proud, I'm saying it again, I'm proud of my European lineage, and nobody's going to make me feel that that is evil or there's something wrong with it. It is part of me. I was made by white people and black people, and that's part of me. Now, if you want me to feel bad about the fact that I've got European lineage, then you're going to have to get in line. There's nothing wrong with that. And this is where I'm saying, the reason South Africa is in this position that we are in. If you look at before 2010, South Africa was singing Kumbaya. They were still singing the Rainbow Nation. I mean, our coat of arms, that says it all. Unity in diversity. We are
Which is a
united
coat of
in
arms,
the...
yeah?
Yes, exactly. That is why I mentioned it. We are united in the differences that we have, not separated. Now, this fight, it seeks to separate us. Never mind the rest of South Africa. It seeks to separate
But
us.
I've been on the same page with you for a lot of the things, but where I'm going to part ways with you is exactly on that point, because the separation didn't come from us. The separation was imposed on us from the Europeans initially, and that's what created what is now known as apartheid. That separation was imposed on us from them. And here's the other point that I also want to make is that last week we had a prince. Which tribe was it? Xhosa.
Yeah.
Then we have previous shows we had Zulu. And to get to your political point is that they were recognized within their tribe,
Yeah.
and they were given land because of their tribe.
Yeah.
You know, and so this is why the argument comes. Even your point that you were making earlier is that if you recognize my tribe and you say, okay, look, the reality of the matter is if the government's gonna recognize the Khoisan tribe, then they must give the whole
Land.
ZACC back then to Khoi.
Which will never happen.
So I
But
want to-
precisely, that's my point.
But I need to answer because I was...
Then they must give the whole ZACC back.
Yeah, I wanna
just to
answer
say
you.
where you went further.
Yeah, but you're going to make me lose my train of thought. Please,
I'm
I
losing
want to
mine
answer. I want to answer you, in terms of the you see now I lost my train of thought now.
The train rode over.
Yeah, the train rode away.
Here's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I never, when I said why you chose Lawrence, I never said that you must perceive white people as evil. What they have done, their deeds were evil, but the people in themselves are not evil. So when I say or refer to your surname,
Okay, and I've got my train of thought.
when I refer to your surname, it's not me saying you must deny the Lawrence in you. What I'm saying is that you have chosen to identify yourself as that, right?
Which is
nothing wrong. Which is one side of your paternal lineage, right? It's your father's side, if I'm correct,
Yeah.
right? So you've
Which is
identified,
which is normal.
which is normal, but you've identified as that,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make you less than part of your mother's lineage.
No, it doesn't.
You understand what I'm
Not
saying?
at
So
all.
what I am referring to is identifying with your lineage, because that's where your Lawrence-ness is in.
Yeah, but remember, to answer you that, remember the Lawrences, when they came to South Africa, were different from the Lawrences that are there now.
It's not the point.
Yes,
that I'm
actually, it's gonna speak
Yes.
to your point. So,
Okay.
so my great grandfather was a chemical engineer. He came to South Africa. He was a chemical engineer, and he and his wife had my grandfather, who was the first-born son. Now, my grandfather married two women. My grandmother, who was a Mapulana, and his other wife, who was colored, and he married the two women. Now, all his siblings, none of his siblings married white people. So of the siblings that got married, there were 3 brothers and 2 sisters. The 2 sisters, one married a Muslim and the other one married a Tamil. And the 3 brothers each married, the 2 brothers both married 2 wives, a colored and a black lady, and the other one married a colored woman. So after that generation, the Lawrences became a different breed of people. So when Lawrence came into South Africa, they were they were British. There were these British
And
people.
the Lawrence that's now, it's
They-
different.
But the Lawrence, not even now, let's just go in that generation. When they got married, the Lawrences became a different tribe of people.
But you have evolved, but you're still a Lawrence.
We've evolved.
But you're
But
still a
I'm saying, that's
Lawrence.
what I'm saying to you now. When it comes to you talking about heritage, yes, that's where it started. But what we became was dependent on what? The disruption of where we were.
But are you
to
still
where
a
we are.
Lawrence?
I'm still a Lawrence.
Gents, I want to call it a show. We've passed the hour.
The last thing that I
So
want to ask you,
let's round it off.
right? In terms of what we've spoken about, and this is a direct question, even to yourself,
Yes.
right? And you, is we've now. If I tell you, or normal colored people, that you're an African, for a long time they've rejected that idea. Nah, I'm not an African. Those are Africans, right? I'm talking about colored people.
Yes,
These
of course,
people that were classified
Joburg
as
people
colored.
mostly.
You can go anywhere in South Africa.
Yeah, okay.
Colored
Even
people.
Cape Town.
Okay.
I think Cape Town might be.
Colored people
Yeah.
they did not want to associate with the term African, right? And this speaks to the malicious intent of the creation of that classification, which is now our own people want to make it an identity and erase their history. So, in essence, now we've come to set a benchmark to how we establish our self-worth.
Yeah.
Earlier I mentioned the whiter you are, the better you are. The straighter your hair, the better that. Now, I'm not saying we don't have European ancestry. What I'm saying is there's nothing wrong with identifying in being African, in being a Bantu. If it is that your history, you said earlier you have Tswana roots and white roots, then be a Tswana or be an
But I'm not a Tswana.
what are you? That's what I'm saying. You want to be something that someone else told you are, because you.
But
never,
you want
let
to tell me
finish.
what to be.
You can finish.
Okay.
No, I'm
If
saying.
only else you whiter
I'm-
than him.
Yes.
And you have brown eyes.
Exactly. Green
Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah, I also have
Green.
brown
So, but my point that I'm making is, and we're having an honest conversation, and I would actually want this conversation to lead to some form of understanding,
Yeah.
and not just we're coming to vent ourselves. You understand? But to depart with some form of agreement. You understand that there is. See, I was losing my train now also.
Hey, these
But-
trains,
hey, But the point that I'm making is, right, the value that we need to begin to shift and move into the Khoisan identity is a very, very crucial part of restoring who we are. The same effort that people want to put in identifying and building the colored community, this racial construct, which legally doesn't exist. And I actually wanted to get into the legal part of being a colored. There's no such a thing in the law as being a colored because it was scrapped. But the same effort that we put into wanting to celebrate this colored identity, why can you not move it and put it into who you really are? Being a proud Tswana and European, whatever the
So
European,
what's that called?
What do you call a Nigerian?
No.
No, what do you call a Nigerian?
I'm not Nigerian. I'm asking.
Listen to my question. I identify as a Khoisan. I identify because that is my root. I don't identify colored because that is not something that is natural. It is something that I was told. So a Nigerian, the Europeans have also conquered in Nigeria and parts of Africa, but nowhere will you find where there's no brown people, or what you call as Khoisan people, have they identified themselves as colored people. In Nigeria, the English have colonized it, but they are still proud of being Nigerian, whatever their root is. So why then must it be different here in South Africa and Namibia and wherever we find ourselves as Khoisan people? Why can we not celebrate that and push value into that root?
As opposed to the...
Why can you not be proud Tswana and why not? Why must you find a different way or differentiate yourself from the rest of the Tswana people because you have white blood inside of you?
But that's the difference. But anyway, let me answer you. Can I answer you?
So is it different? You can answer this. Is it different when African people mean?
You're saying, first of all, we're not Nigeria. And the way that Nigeria... Yeah, but no, we're not Nigeria. And the way that even America, we're not America. We cannot follow the way that Americans... Because you've seen America have their way of looking at culture. We all know that. England even have their way of looking at culture and race and all those. Everywhere in the world, people have a way of looking at it. In South America, where the colored people, for instance, in Brazil, are majority in Brazil. And they are known as mixed people. They're not known as Africans. They're known as mixed people in Brazil. Just Brazil right here. But South Africa is South Africa. And we are South African. So we must look at things from a South African context, number one, firstly. And secondly, when you're saying it's not natural, I don't agree with you because everything that is labeled started somewhere. People, yes, it's a label. But I said to you, the label is one aspect of the thing. The identity has been there. Even if we were called anything else, the identity would still be there. We would still have that. The social construct, you cannot run away from it. That is who we are, the way we came together, the commonness amongst us, the language, the way that you spoke about, the accent. I mean, if you just to make an example, the way people speak in Cape Town versus Northern Cape versus the Free State versus the Transvaal versus Gauteng. Pretoria and Joburg have a different way of speaking. Durban, they speak English. They don't even speak Afrikaans at all. But even with all those those differences, have you noticed that it doesn't matter whether you go to KwaZulu-Natal, whether you go to the Northern Cape, whether you go to Cape Town, you walk in there and there's something, people that might have never seen each other, there's something that brings us together. Now, if you're telling me that biology doesn't matter, then you have to relook that because there is your evidence. The evidence is across the country that there's something that identifies us different from any other mixed group of people in the whole world.
That's the evolution of the
obvious,
Khoisan.
But you seem to be making his point now,
It's the
actually.
evolution of the Khoisan. And if you go into all these communities, they all...
It sounds like you're arguing his
You're
point.
making
in
it sound
church,
like... No,
in
you're
church,
making it sound like there was no other
when you go
influence.
to church,
No,
when
there
you
is
go to
another.
church,
No.
When
My
you go to
argument
church,
is-
when
my
you go to
argument
church,
is-
when you go to church,
Yeah, I was
and you
still
listen
busy,
to, it's
but I was
fine.
still busy.
When you go to church and you go on into all of these colored communities and their churches, Christian churches,
Yeah.
the music that they play, all of them are the same thing because it speaks to that Khoisan history.
Yeah,
that
but you
they
make
have.
it sound like it only speaks to one. It doesn't speak to Khoisan alone. Let's be honest with each other.
So where's
we
the
are
other
not
part in there?
formed by Khoisan alone. And we cannot extricate the one. We cannot
I'm not
remove
saying you're a
one.
Khoisan.
No, I'm saying we,
Who's
as a
we?
whole, all of us,
Who's
are
we?
not, you know who, all of us are not.
The colored people.
Yes, we are not comprised from the Khoisan alone. The respect for the Khoisan, that is the essence of our existence.
That's
That's
why I
the
asked that
essence
question.
of our existence. That's the essence. And I cannot take it away. I'm just one specific person who happens to have a different mix. But we cannot take that away, the essence of the Khoisan. But we can also not take away all the other elements. Because if it had to be the Khoisan element alone, we would be having a different conversation.
never
today.
said it's Khoisan
we would be
alone.
yes, but that's the idea that
You
you're
are
pushing.
colored and you're different.
We would today have a different conversation because we are formed by everything that came into contact with us. But at some point, we created that structure. And the problem that we have, that is why I fought with a lot of people that says colored people have no culture. I said, then you don't understand what culture means. Culture is a form of civilization based on a specific period in time, chosen by a group of people to live by. And we've done that. That is why I keep using the word, we're a social construct. We exist. And we had an influence in the shaping of South Africa with that social construct. We existed. Yes, it's bad what happened, with the way that the government, how they've tried to erase the indigenous people. That's what they did. But you must not run away from how we are today. Whatever you decide when you leave here to call yourself, how we are today is because of all of those, the Indians and the Europeans and the Chinese and the Italians, etc., etc. That's why we are the way we are. And you cannot just have a one-sided approach to it. We must include everyone. And even with the identity conversation, you have to consult. You cannot make a decision on your own to say, sorry, yes, I'm reminded of what you said, that the legal, from a legal point of view, who consulted us? Who consulted us to say that this name must be removed? Who consulted us? They're not allowed to do that. We were the ones that were supposed to say that, hey, we do not want this identity. I was not consulted. So as long as I've not been consulted, it's a crime. It was illegal. What was done was illegal because I was not consulted. As long as you've not consulted me on my identity, you cannot make a law. We are a participatory democracy in South Africa. You cannot make laws.
Did they consult you when they gave you the name?
We were not consulted. You were talking about what the government, the current government, we're speaking now in the present
Be a proud
time.
Tswana is what I'm saying.
We are living in the present. And anybody that made a decision to say that this name must be scrapped broke the law because they did not consult us. So before you tell me what my identity is, you have to consult me. Before you tell me what I shouldn't be, you have to consult me. You cannot decide and then afterwards come and tell me, hey, this is who you're supposed to be. No. Then you're breaking the law. Then you are just as bad as the nationalist government and the colonialist that you're speaking of.
That racial category was, all of them were scrapped from
Yes,
the
but
law.
you didn't hear what I said. You still didn't hear what I said.
No, I heard you.
We have not been
It was not imposed.
consulted.
You never were you consulted when they gave you the name?
No, we were not consulted. Democracy presented a
It's the
constitution
crime against
that was
humanity.
inclusive.
That is the reason why that had
No.
to be
Democracy presented a constitution.
All I'm saying is be proud of being a Tswana.
that was
Don't deny
that was
your
there
Tswana
for
root.
participation. We are in a participatory democracy.
Since we have to call it, I don't think
Steph,
we're gonna. I don't
one
think. Okay, closing. Let's close the remarks, but let's
it's gonna
keep it short.
It's going to be very short.
Yeah.
And that's actually why I asked the question if your identity is to the exclusion of Khoisan identity, because you specifically said it's an amalgamation of things.
Yes.
And I think maybe where you guys are missing each other is on the one side, it's to the exclusion of colored identity. On the other side, it's the perceived exclusion of Khoisan
No, it's
identity.
not exclusion.
Perceived,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I'm saying that, look, when we have to take these issues further, and I agree with you when you say that you're not Tswana, because of course you don't live your life in the way that Tswana people would. You don't follow their traditions, things of that nature. Now, our job has to be, in the same way that other pre-colonial cultures know exactly what their culture is, their traditions are, their practices and things of that nature, we have to also consolidate those things, right? So to the extent that someone says that for whatever reason I'm colored, for whatever reason I'm Khoisan, even if those things were to be joined, we can have an understanding of what that means so that these types of misconceptions don't happen amongst ourselves. Because to the extent that we have to still find an identifier that is exclusionary or causes some form of disagreement, then our hopes of progress are then stunted because we first then have to join forces before we can go forward. So I think it would be easier for us to actually have a more consolidated view on who we are as a people. Because like I said previously, before this whole interaction went on, is that we do not have that. We do not have a consolidated code of practice. We don't have consolidated traditions. KZN, for instance, they have a bigger British influence, especially from some of them are called saints. There's an island that they have specific roots from. The Northern Cape is very particular. Joburg, all of these things are very particular. So we cannot then say that this has to be who we are. So I agree with it that there must be some sort of consultation that happens. But first and foremost, whatever that process is, it needs to be for the development and for the furtherance of our interests first. If that's not going to be what our efforts are, then I think it is just a useless practice. Because at the end of the day, the name that we call ourselves, if we can't derive value from the legal system, it makes no sense whatever we are called. If we can't derive value from society, if we can't derive political value, if we can't derive continental and geopolitical value, it makes no difference what we are called. So our first thing is to consolidate what our interests are as a people. How do we mitigate the problems we are in right now? How do we alleviate those? And how do we develop ourselves? That needs to be more important than who we tell ourselves we are. Then when that is done, everything else would be hunky-dory.
Yeah,
as they say.
you're asking to build a a difficult task.
That's why
It
we're
is a
here.
difficult task, and that's why I guess these conversations are healthy, and that's the whole point of these conversations.
Yeah.
Gents, we're gonna have to call it today, as I know once we start another topic, we can go on for another 30 minutes on that conversation. But gentlemen, thank you for coming through this morning. I think these conversations are necessary. I think they push the conversation forward, and I think if I'm looking at the comment section, there were 130 people watching just now. We are on 120 at the moment. And the comment section is buzzing. People are going at each other, which is I guess it's healthy dialogue.
It's part
right?
of healing the past.
It's part of healing. It's dialogue. It's conversation, and that's why I said in the beginning of this conversation, let's disagree as much as we need to, but let's remain respectful, which is what we did. And so, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
It's an honor.
Thank you. Right.
Thanks.
Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years, 6, 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.